So this afternoon, well done for turning up, by the way, in this sort of weather and all windy and rough. But we're going to walk through a few ideas that I think are really worthwhile thinking through, if we don't get washed away. So yesterday we talked about the different pictures of God. I should have asked that for the question, shouldn't I? 5 pictures of God. Do you remember what they were? Under, over, from, for, with. So this afternoon we're going to be talking about connecting with God. So we're saying, hey, it's a with picture of God. We're talking about connecting with God. John 15, Jesus says, I'm the vine, you are the branch. Cosman, you know all about vines and branches. And it says, if you connect, remain, abide is the different words it used. If you connect, remain, abide, and through you, I'll produce much fruit. So what's it look like to connect, remain, abide? That's what we're going to talk about this afternoon for a while. What's that connection look like? How do we grow that connection? How's that connection work? Because reality is the way I connect with God is going to be different to the way you connect with God. We all have different ways of connecting. And God has wired you up for a unique relationship that's unlike anyone else. So the relationship that God's wired you up for is different. So I can tell you how I connect with God, but it doesn't mean that's the right way for you. Different people are different, and you will know that if you're married, you'll know that the person you're married to is probably quite different from you. So, I'm married to Amanda. Amanda's not a morning person. And if someone was tell Amanda that the best time of the day to do her devotionals was get up at 5 a.m. and do an hour, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. But if Amanda at night time, late at night time, sits and does the devotional, that's when her brain's working. Me, I'm the opposite to that. And so we've got to find ways to make it work together. But different people are different. So I can tell you how I do it, but different people are wired up different ways. So Amanda's going to walk us through what we call the connection points. Amanda, if you walk us through the 7 connection points, let's grab your mic somewhere there. Where's the one No, Cosman's got one.
Well, as Brendan said, there's 7 connection points. Where's a good spot for me to stand? Here? Is that where I stand? Here? Okay. Oh, there. All right. There's 7 connection points. The first one is intellectual. That would probably be the way our son Ben connects. He likes to hear things and read things, and he learns a lot of things, and he feels when he's learning new things, he feels closer to God. And this afternoon he was thinking about tithing, and yesterday Cosman and Brendan and he had a conversation, and he went home, read through the 28 fundamentals, and came back and had another chat with Cosman at lunchtime. I think maybe Cosman wishes he'd sat somewhere else, but anyway, he got bombarded by our son's questions and comments and thoughts, and he'll go away and he'll think about that again, and he'll probably come back and find you tomorrow and do the same thing again. But he likes to think through things, and he gets really enthusiastic, so that's really great. The next way is, which one comes up next? Relational. Now, when you're thinking of your church group and the people who sit down in church, and the intellectuals are obviously waiting for what? What are they waiting for to happen? They're waiting for the sermon. They want all the preliminaries to finish so that they can get to the meat and hear the sermon. Well, what are the relationals doing? Well, they're waiting until the sermon's over. They've listened to the sermon, they've listened to the music, and at the end, they want to discuss through what they heard. So they've heard something, and so I guess Ben's relational as well. So they've heard something that really appeals to them, and the way they remember that is to sit down with their friends and they talk through what they've learnt in the sermon. And that's really important, that they get an opportunity to chat through with their friends, talk about it at the church lunch, and that's where they feel closer to God, when they can talk about things together. The next one is service. That's our youngest son, James. He just loves to help, and he's really enjoying camp because he said, my favourite part of camp is to go and help Tina in the ABC at the end of his program in the evening. And so he can't wait to get in there and help stack books and help with the customers and give out the books to people, the free book. He says to Tina, what free book are we giving out today? So he likes to do that. So that's his way of connecting with people. Then the worship. What are the worshippers? What are they wanting? Yeah, they want to sing the song again. Let's sing it one more time, one more time. They love and feel closer to God during worship. And I like to sit in my car and when I drive along, put on some music and sing loudly where no one can hear me as I drive along in the car. And I feel really close to God that way. And then there's contemplative. They're the people who want to sit quietly somewhere and pray. My dad's contemplative as well as relational, and he gets up early every morning and he prays for an hour for our family. I feel really blessed to have him do that for us. And he prays for anybody else who goes to him and adds something to the list, and he feels really close to God when he prays. And the last one, this is our other son, Brad. He's creation. He loves to be out in creation, and he's one of the people who would head out and look for animals in the bush. When Brendan and he went out to Central Australia, how many years ago was it? 4 years ago. He said, I'm praying to God that he will let a thorny devil come past so I can see a thorny devil. And Mr. Gilmore out there said, oh, look, you're not going to see any thorny devils. I've been here for 7 years and I haven't seen any at all. And he said, oh, well, look, I'm praying about it and God will send a thorny devil to me. And as you can see in that picture over there, a thorny devil did turn up. God came along with the thorny devil and he sent it into Brad's path and he was so excited. And he's like, God answered my prayer. So he loves to get out into nature. He's pretty quiet. He's not like our other two boys. And so he sort of hangs back and listens a lot, but he really feels close to God and creation. I think Brendan told you the story yesterday about the answer to prayer he got for his study this year, which is really exciting, and we're still quite excited about it. So all these ways, you might have one or two of those, or maybe even three, but you'll have 2 or 3 ways that you're closest to God, that you find your connection point with him. And each of us are different, and we find our ways differently. And it almost makes us like fingerprints of God, because he connects with each one of us in a different way, and we are all special to him.
So with the connection points, you might be thinking already, you probably can work out which 1 or 2 you're strongest on. So you might think, I'm the service person, or I'm the intellectual, or I'm the relational, or I'm the worship. You probably can think which ones you're strongest on. Does it make one of them better or worse than another? No, it doesn't. The other reality is all of us are called to be intellectual because God calls all of us to grow in understanding his word. Okay, so all of us are called to be intellectual, even if that's not your primary way. All of us are called to be relational because God calls all of us into community. In Romans chapter 12, it talks about connecting in the body of Christ. So all of us are called to be relational. All of us are called to serve. All of us are called to worship. All of us are called to be still and know that I am God in the contemplative space. And all of us are called to steward creation. So you're called to all of those. But some of those you're going to be stronger than other ones. A guy called Gary Thomas wrote a book where he went through people in Scripture. And he went through and said, well, Miriam's this, and Paul was this, and he just went through various characters and looked at what they wrote and how they relate to God, and then grouped them into these 6 areas. So what it does mean, it means that your way is different to someone else. And it means the person you're married to is probably different to you and may have a different pathway to you. It means that what you get excited about doesn't necessarily mean that someone else is going to get excited by the same thing. And it doesn't make it better or worse. And so an intellectual person might read something amazing, and I would say Raiko's an intellectual person. I've heard him present theology and read stuff, and he might say, this is amazing. And he might give it to me, and I'm more creation person. I'll go, that's interesting. but it doesn't do anything amazing for me. Yet I might find something amazing, and I show it to Ryko in creation. I'll go, look at this, Ryko. Have you seen this? That's interesting, but it's not amazing. It's totally true. And reality is, as a church family, guess what? You've got all of these. And there's people in your church family who aren't going to think the same way as you think. And they're going to experience God differently. And you're going to have people in your church who, as Amanda mentioned, love the worship part of the worship service. You've got people who love the intellectual part. The contemplatives, what do they want in the worship service? They want quiet. And contemplative people don't usually have their agenda put forward very often. Okay, it's usually the relational people get a lot to say around the church. The intellectual people get a lot to say around the church. The contemplative people, not so much. But has anyone ever been to Stanmore Church in Sydney? Stanmore's in the inner west, and it's a little old church there. It's got the second oldest organ in New South Wales. But the day I went and preached at Stanmore Church, behind where the pastor stands here, and there's a wall behind you, and in old English writing, like the top of the Sun Herald newspaper, old English writing, it says, "The Lord is in his sanctuary, let all the earth be silent before him." And I remember walking in and seeing that in Stanmore, and I thought, at some board meeting, at some time in this church's history, the contemplatives won the day. Because they could have said, let's make a joyful noise to the Lord with loud clashing cymbals. They could have put that verse on the wall. Or they could have put a whole lot of other verses on the wall. But they chose to paint that one. Does it make it right or wrong? Well, there's just different ways of relating to God. So, what it does mean is choose the area you're strongest in. That's the area you're going to make sure that your daily spiritual practices include that. If it's intellectual, you need to make sure you're being challenged by really good material. If it's relational, you need to make sure you're in a small group. Make sure there's a spot where you can talk. If it's serving, make sure you're involved. Make sure there's a place that you get the opportunity to be using that gift to honour God. If it's worship, surround yourself with good music and spaces where you can feel worship. Contemplative, you need to make your quiet time. Creation, then you need to make a space where you're embracing that. Amanda told you about Brad, our oldest son, and his creation. And one night, on Friday night, we have a little tin called Table Talk. Have you seen Table Talk? It's a little tin of questions. Amanda wrote the questions, actually. And they sold through the ABCs, little tins of, and you pull out a question, and it's useful because it's just a random question, and the whole family chats it through. So we pulled out this question, and it says, "I feel most worshipful when," and you have to complete the sentence. And Brad, when it came time for him to complete the sentence, without even saying anything more, he goes, "I feel most worshipful when I'm feeding the turtles." And it was like, "Tell us about that, Brad. Tell us about feeding turtles." He goes, "Because they put their little heads out and they're waving little arms and they look like they're worshipping God." And so for him, that's where he saw a connection point with God. Someone else could feed the turtles and wouldn't feel that same thing. So it doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong, just makes it different. What I can do is I'll put up my email address a little bit later, because we've written up a bunch of questions where you can go through, and if you're thinking, what am I strongest on? What are my areas that I'm not as strong on? We can work that out. Because here's the other reality. The other reality is you can stretch in the areas you're not strong on. That's a good opportunity to stretch. So when you go to a gym, so you join up the gym, and they give you an assessment, and they go, "You're strong on that, you're strong on that, and that's your area for growth." And it's the same with this. There's areas we can go, "I'm going to stretch in that one." So it doesn't mean that you look at someone else and go, "What they're doing is silly." You just think that's an area to stretch. So that's spiritual connection points, which is one important part of your connection with God. I can't tell you you have to do it this way. The next idea I want to walk you through is this training versus trying, because I think this is really important as well. So I'm going to walk you through 3 ideas this afternoon. How about No, and I saw on the program, I wasn't here on Sunday, because supposedly I was meant to be at South New South Wales camp until that one got cancelled. But out of you people here who were at camp on Sunday, did anyone do that fun run? You did. You had a nap, did you say?
No, I had one lap.
Oh, you did one lap. I thought you said I had a nap. And I was thinking, fair enough. That sounds like what Amanda would do. So you did one lap? Okay. So how'd you go?
I encouraged my kids to finish.
Keep going. Did you run, Cosman?
Yes, to Launceston and back.
You ran to Launceston and back. Rico, did you go on the fun run?
We had a time of worship.
You were worshipping. You were following a different pathway. And the gentleman over this corner, I don't know your name, sorry. Did you go a fun run?
Sorry?
Did you go in the fun run on Sunday? No? What about if to each of you, what about if I said that on this Sunday morning you're going to run the marathon representing Australia, and if you had the will to do so, how are you going to go? The best you could? What if you tried really hard? You reckon you're going to finish? You'd walk? If you tried really hard and did your very best. Okay, well, what about if I said to you that this time in 2 years, you're going to run the marathon representing Australia? What's going to happen between now and then? You're going to train, if you had the will to do so. You're going to train. And what you're going to do, you did one lap, you might do 2 laps. And you're going to increase your capacity to do some laps. You're probably going to get some different shoes. You'll go to one of those shoe shops where they measure it up properly and make sure it's all okay and get different shoes. You'll get some running clothes. You might buy a magazine called Running Magazine. Do you know they exist? And if you go into the newsagents where there's lots of magazines, obviously someone buys those things. And it's all about running, and it tells you different events and different ways people run and different things to hydrate and different shoes. So you're going to read about running. You'll probably get a coach if you took it seriously, and that coach would keep you motivated and measure where you're headed and put together a program for you, and there'll be times of intensity and times of less intensity. You're probably going to change some of your habits in the day so you can make sure you get that run in, and these people who take running very seriously, they make sure they get a certain number of kilometres in for the week. So you're going to put your life around some different habits to make that work. So, what about then, in that next time we run the marathon, we've done that training, how are you going to go? A lot better. You might not win the marathon, but you're going to achieve a lot more by training than you are by trying. Trying is of some value, but training makes the difference. It's the same with any discipline in life. Let's say that Cosman said to me, next year, Brendan, you have camp every second year. Hey, next time we have big camp, Brendan, we want you to play the keyboard. I can't play the keyboard, but let's say that's what had to happen. Between now and that day, I would get a teacher. I would start off one finger on very simple scales. I would make time to practice. And next time I turn up, I might not be as good as the people playing it at the moment, but by training, I would achieve what trying doesn't. I could stand there right now and try as hard as I want to. So why am I telling you this? Paul says in 1 Timothy 4, 7 and 8, he says, train yourself in godliness. And he actually uses the illustration of an athlete. And he says they train for a crown that doesn't matter. But he said, you're training for something that matters for eternity. What you're doing actually matters. So he says, train yourself because what you're doing matters. Now, there's a big difference between training and trying. Too often people try. And you'll especially see it with young people. They'll come to an event like camp and they'll get inspired, and there'll be a preacher who inspires them or whatnot, and they'll go, I'm going to try. Or sometimes at the start of a year, someone will make a New Year's resolution, I'm going to try. And you can try really hard. And self-disciplined people can try harder for longer. But when it doesn't work, and this is what I think is a sad thing, when it doesn't work, people think I tried God and it didn't work. Or someone else gets up and talks about their spiritual life, and you think, I will try that. No, sometimes you hear, well, Dwight Nelson gets up and talks about journaling. And you hear Dwight talk about journaling. And a few years ago when I was working in Sydney, we took a bunch of pastors across to America and we went around to all these different churches, and we went to Dwight's church, and Dwight had a special meeting with our pastors and talked about what he does as the pastor. And he showed us these journals. And he has journals where he's written wonderful thoughts, and he's rewritten passages of scripture, and he writes about his relationship with God. And I was thinking, I should journal. I really should journal. And guess how many times I've started a journal? And guess how far I get? Oh, it's got a few pages. And if I was more self-disciplined, I'd have a few more pages. We're wired up to do it differently, but if I was to train in that, then I would start a little bit and increase my capacity for that. Or sometimes you get preachers telling you that you need to get up at 5 o'clock and do an hour of prayer. And maybe that's what they're doing and it's very good. But if you're going to train in that, you're going to start simply. And you might start with a few minutes of prayer, which might feel like a long time if you haven't talked to God in a while. And you'll increase your capacity for that. So, first of all, I want the idea of the spiritual connection points. But then I want you to think about the training and the trying idea. That training starts simple and increases your capacity, where too many people say, I tried, and it didn't work. So I said 3 ideas. We'll do one more idea. So first idea is the connection points. Second idea, training versus trying. Third idea, what are we going to grow in? So this is, if you've got your Bibles, let's go to Romans 12. Romans 12, which I think it's my favourite chapter. I think everything you need to know is in Romans 12. And Paul starts off there. He says, therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing unto God. This is your spiritual act of worship. I think if you were to see the Apostle Paul and say, Apostle Paul, what's your mission statement? I think he would say to you, I'm a living sacrifice. And all through Romans and all through his writing, he talks about being in Christ. He's talking about dying to self and being alive in Christ, because I'm a living sacrifice. I don't even own my life. So therefore, in view of God's mercy, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice. Well, in Romans chapter 11, he's just finished that whole prayer where he's saying, who is God that we can know his mind, and who is God that we should ever repay him? From him, by him, for him are all things. To him be the glory forever, is where Romans 11 is up. Therefore, in view of God's mercy, offer yourself as a living sacrifice. Or Eugene Peterson, I'm not usually a big fan of paraphrases, but I think the way he paraphrases the start of Romans 12 in the Message Bible is really quite captivating. He says, in your ordinary everyday life, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're going to work and walking around life. He says, place that before God. He says, embracing what he does for you is the best you can do for him. Then Eugene Peterson writes, he says, don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit in without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God, readily recognize what he wants from you. Then he says, unlike the culture around you that's always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, Christ brings out well-formed attitudes in you. So that's how Eugene Peterson paraphrases that little section. NIV, it says, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by renewing of your mind. And that's one of the challenges. The reality is, left to our natural drift, we're going to get conformed to the pattern of this world. Where Paul's writing, be transformed by renewing of your mind. So conformed versus transformed. And the pattern of this world, and I won't go into it today, but we can do a whole talk on consumerism sometime, because that's the pattern of this world that conforms us to its way of thinking. Be transformed and renewing of your mind. So what's a living sacrifice do? Well, these are the 5 areas. So you've got 5 connection points. You've got training versus trying, but these are the 5 areas that I think is really useful to think that these are the areas you're going to train in. Okay, so, and I think Paul gives them all here. Already he says this is your spiritual act of worship. So you're going to train in worship as a living sacrifice. So this is your spiritual act of worship. Worship matters. Reality is, you and I don't get to choose whether we're going to worship or not worship. We're going to be worshippers. We're going to worship something or somebody. And for the Apostle Paul, when the worship of God grows dim, we start worshipping created things, and most times that's ourselves. Or in our culture, we worship celebrity, saying, you're going to worship. What are you going to worship? He says, let your life be a life of worship. So we're going to train in worshipping. Paul then jumps topics, it feels like, because he's just been talking about worshipping, but all of a sudden he's talking, for the grace given you, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith that God has given you. Just as each one has a body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ, we who are many form one body. Each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts, according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is prophesying, let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it is serving, let him serve. If it is teaching, let him teach. If it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him lead diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. So Paul's just talking about worship, but now all of a sudden he's talking about serving. Because the other area to train in, if you're going to be a living sacrifice, is training in service. And that's serving in your home, serving in your church, serving in your community. And at different seasons of life, you get different opportunities to serve in different places. When you have a little baby in your house, that's pretty much swallows up all your serving. It's a different season of life. At other seasons of life, you get more opportunities to serve in different spaces. But we're all called to serve, all called to use our gifts. Then Paul jumps topics again. By the time you get to verse 9, he's just talked about serving, but now he's saying, love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in brotherly love, honour one another above yourselves. So now he's saying, in connecting in your church family. He's saying, live deeply in relationships. For Paul, that's a big deal. He's saying, hey, we're meant to be relational people. We're not meant to be doing this as individuals. So for some of us, that might be the training area. How are we going to do relationships better? It doesn't mean you all have to have that as your primary pathway, and it doesn't mean you all have to be extroverts, because as Paul's already said, there's different places in the church for different people. But he said we are going to take seriously what it means to connect with our fellow believers. Verse 11 and 12, he's saying, keep your spiritual fervour, but never be lacking in zeal. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. So he's saying, do those things that keep you growing. Be faithful in prayer. Do those things that keep your spiritual fervour. Do those things that keep you growing in connection with God, allowing Christ to dwell in and work in and through you. Then the rest of the chapter is talking about sharing. He's talking about sharing what you have, literally saying share with those in need. But he's also talking about sharing who you are as a person. So why do I show you these? And I was about to say tomorrow I'll give you a prize if you remember them, but then you might think I don't remember them, I'm not coming, and I won't have anyone to talk to. So, worshipping, serving, connecting, growing, sharing. Why am I showing you these? Because Paul's just mapped those out in Romans 12 as living sacrifice things. But you find these everywhere. Everywhere you look, you find these same 5 points. For example, if I was to ask you why we keep the Sabbath and what do we do on Sabbath, what would be your answer? Worship, serve, connect, grow, share. You might use different words. If I was to ask you why the church is on the planet, why this idea of church is here, and what's the mission of the church, what would you say that it is? Well, if you read our fundamental on the church, it says, in continuity with the children of Israel from Old Testament times, it says we're called out, it says we're called out for worshipping the Creator. It says we're called out for the service of all mankind. It says we're called out for a deepening connection with God. It says we're called out for growing in God's word. Then it says we're called out for, it uses the word proclamation, proclaiming God to others. So the church exists for 5 reasons. So the church exists for the same 5 reasons that you exist, by the way. If you were to say to the Apostle Paul, why do I exist? He goes, you exist to glorify God. You exist to be a living sacrifice. And you go, how am I going to be a living sacrifice? You're going to worship, you're going to serve, you're going to share, you're going to grow, you're going to connect. And you're going to say, Paul, that church that you started, what's it there for? He goes, it's there to glorify God. It's there to be Christ's body. And what's that church going to do? It's going to worship and grow and serve and share and connect. On the Sabbath, what are we going to do? We're going to worship, we're going to grow, we're going to share, we're going to serve and connect. If you were to go to the 7 churches of Revelation and you see what they're commended for and what they're warned for, where it says, hey, you do this really well, but I have this against you. You can go through each of those, you do this well, but I have this against you. And it's either going to be worship, some of them are gone, but you're tolerating these false gods, or it's going to be service, or it's going to be connecting, come back to your first love, you've got blasé about all this, or it's going to be grow, keep your spiritual fervour, or it's going to be sharing. If I was to ask you, what are the 5 things you're going to be doing in heaven? 5 things you're going to be doing in heaven. You're getting the idea now. Worshipping, because Revelation describes these incredible scenes of worship for eternity. Serving, you're going to be serving in heaven. Well, Isaiah does talk about, and this is why I'm looking at Cosman, because it talks about serving in God's vineyard. And I grew up on a fruit property, serving in a vineyard. I've done enough of that. That's why I'm saying to Cosman, I'm going to ask for a different job. And I'm pointing at Cosman because he's got some vines. Connecting. We're going to be connecting in heaven. Heaven's all about an ever deepening connection with God and one another. We're going to be growing in heaven. Are we going to be learning more about God's word in heaven? Ellen White says the themes of salvation will be our study for eternity. So for all eternity, we're going to be learning more about salvation and more of why God, who is this awesome big God who creates the universe, is actually in love with us. We're going to learn that for eternity. Serving, sharing. You've got a lifetime to share and eternity to spend with the people we share with. So these are the things that matter for eternity as well. I'm going to give you a weird one. And Amanda always gets just a little bit bothered when I go for the weird one. Because if you were to read through Paul and you were to ask Paul, why did God invent sex? He would say, it's about worship. He says it's a model of his God, husband, wife. He says it's a model of how God works. He says it's about serving. He says, don't put your own needs ahead of someone else. It's serving. He says it's about deepening connection. He says it's about growing. How's it growing? Well, he describes, he goes, no, are you going to go and associate yourself with a prostitute? He goes, no, you're not going to do that because you don't even belong to yourself. And for Paul, and it is about sharing. Everywhere you look, Paul has the growing, serving, connecting, sharing, worshipping. Where you look through different themes of scripture, you see growing, serving, connecting, sharing, worshipping. You might use different words, but I think it's useful to have those file hangers in your brain, because every time you hear a sermon at church, guess what? It's either going to grow you in your capacity to worship, serve, connect, grow, or share. Or it might be one or two of those. The church that Amanda and I were at, Papatoe in New Zealand, in the bulletin we'd always say, this week the sermon is, and the characteristic developing is growing, or we're connecting, or it's for sharing. If you've got a role at church, it's going to be one of these. If you're in charge of social, then which part of these are you developing? You're connecting, which is a really important thing, and it can also be sharing as new people get involved. If you're running a Sabbath school class, what do you reckon you're going to be doing? Which one? It's a growing. It can also be a connecting. Some groups get out and do a serving opportunity. Whichever role you do at church is going to be one of these. Whatever sermons you hear at church is going to be one or more of these. And so by having these file hangers in your head, you can go, that's growing my capacity for either worshipping, serving, connecting, growing, sharing. So that gives you some file hangers to think, well, that's what I'm going to train in. So you train in those areas, and you think, let me show you the next little idea, this diagram. Because a healthy disciple is going to be balanced in these. If you get really strong at one, you see some people who go to the gym and do lots and lots of chest and never do their legs, end up with big chests and little puny legs because they've got really good at one and not another. In these, sometimes there's some that you're more attracted to and you think, I like doing this. But a healthy Christian balances those 5. And a healthy Christian will get a nice circle of those 5 areas. Keeping in mind that they're all really connected, which is why we've drawn the lines. They're broken lines. Because as you worship, you grow. As you serve, you grow. As you serve, you connect. And so they're not all neat little categories. And so they all connect around the circle. So a healthy Christian balances those 5 out. So you're not spending all your time serving. Serving, great, needs to be part of your training plan, but it's not all of it. Because sometimes you need to be taking some time when you're keeping your spiritual fervour, where it's you and God, and if you're always serving, then you can end up in that for God mentality. You can end up burning out on that one, and you can do lots of serving but never any space. It's like lots of breathing out without breathing in. And you can be continually breathing out rather than to keep your spiritual fervour, be faithful in prayer and doing those things that allow Christ to dwell richly in you. Or you might think it's all about connection. And church becomes the big social club, which is great. But it's all about connection. It's all about connection. And sometimes churches connect so well that they forget about sharing. And a new person turns up, and it's like the new person is attending someone else's family reunion. All those people know each other, and all those people get on beautifully. But that person knows they're not supposed to be there. So you can end up connecting but forgetting about sharing. Or you can get churches that put a huge focus on sharing and do little more. And every year it's seminars and evangelism campaigns and more seminars and more campaigns. And you come back next year and they're still doing more seminars and more campaigns, but nothing else has really changed because those people that have turned up, they've never grown them or they've never connected them. They've just kept doing more of one of those. So as a person you balance those, as a church you balance those. And you balance those 5 areas. You could probably think of denominations that excel at different ones of these. And they will become so focused on one. If I say serving, and this is not a negative, if I say serving, what denomination do you think of? You think of Salvation Army immediately. And if you talk to Salvation Army pastors, one of their big challenges is a lot of people don't even realise we're a church. And they don't realise we have a congregation that meets together. And they don't realise that we're more than a serving organisation. Try another one. If I was to say worshipping, you thought of Hillsong, where it's all about worship. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the course that they do at the Alpha Crucis Bible College to train a person who's going to be a pastor at their church, guess what? There's worship electives, you're learning about sound, you're learning about lighting, you're learning about staging, you're learning about production. Rico, did you cover that at Avondale? No. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, by the way. It's just sometimes we go, here's this focus or here's that focus. I would like to think as Adventists we've got a nice wheel, but what do you reckon our strongest one is if you had to put us on that wheel? Sharing? Yeah, we do evangelism quite intently. Or growing in God's Word, we take theology seriously. Ideally, we're all of that, hey? And this is one of the great things about the whole idea of Sabbath. Sabbath is meant to recalibrate us around the growing, connecting, serving, sharing, worshipping. why I think this is important, and I actually think this is important for kids to know as well. And at Papatoe, we used to, our kids, we used to have a whole bunch of kids. There was hundreds of kids. And most of them would be able to say, why are you on this planet? I'm here to grow, serve, connect, share, worship. Because it allows them to filter through what they're doing in life. Whatever they're going to do, if they're a student at university, they're a student who's going to grow, serve, connect, share, worship. If they're working down at the supermarket, they're working there to grow, serve, connect, share, worship. And so your spirituality doesn't become something separate to your life. Because in the end, when we talk about connecting with God, it's not about doing something else extra to life. Your spiritual practices, the times you spend in contemplative time or the times you spend reading God's word, are just for you to live life being God's representative, being God's hands, God's feet. And you can do that anywhere. And every moment then, like Eugene Peterson paraphrases Romans 12, in your ordinary everyday life, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're going to work and walking around life, place that before God. So that's the 3 points. 3 points is we all connect with God differently. Point number 2, it's training over trying. Point number 3, there's 5 areas we're going to grow in, and we use those spiritual connection points to grow in those areas. And out of that, we can make a little training plan. Now, you can probably work that out yourself. I think, there's that little man, and he's going to work out how he's going to grow and how he's going to connect and how he's going to serve and how he's going to share and how he's going to worship. And you can write up a little training plan. I've put together a little tool, and I think I've put my email address there, that if you wanted a little tool, there's a little tool that you can go through. It asks you a bunch of questions. It guides you through the process. It asks you some questions about how you wired up to connect with God. It then goes through the 5 areas and where you're up to on that, and you give yourself a little score. Not that you can ever really measure where you're up to in those areas, because it's far more organic, but just for the sake of making you think, it gives you a little score on that. It'll draw your little circle and it'll say, this is where I'm on serving, and here I'm growing, here I'm connecting. And then it says, here's my training plan. And you can write up a little training plan saying, this year, I'm going to get more involved in serving. How am I going to do that? I'm going to get involved in serving more in my school. Or I'm going to get involved in serving more in my community, whatever it's going to be. Or this year, I'm going to take this growing idea more seriously. One of the things that I committed to do this year, and I've neglected it until this week, and I still haven't got it all sorted, is one of the things, I've got a bit lazy on some stuff, and one of the things that having a Kindle iPad allows you to do is it allows you to get your lesson pamphlet on your Kindle, so it's sort of like, okay, there's my lesson pamphlet. About when we were at Yarra Valley Church, it was when your dad was down, so at the end of last year, just before Christmas. And Yarra Valley Church is a little church just up the road from us, and there was this little old lady sitting in front of me at the lesson time. And she had a lesson pamphlet that was just written all over. And she had obviously studied that lesson intently. And I was sitting diagonally behind her, and I couldn't help but notice that here's this little old lady who's obviously faithfully gone through her lesson. And she hasn't just skimmed it like I do on an iPad and go flick, flick, flick. Or she hasn't just grabbed it on Sabbath morning, which I wish I didn't, but sometimes I do, and go flick, flick, flick. She's obviously looked at the verses. She's written answers into the question. I used to do that. I haven't done that for years. She's written answers into the spot. She's highlighted things. And I looked at her, and I ended up commenting to her after the Sabbath school. I said, I think your lesson pamphlet is beautiful. Not because, she's had this lovely writing, but because she just worked on it. And so I thought, I must do that. The year came around. I downloaded this quarter onto my iPad. Because you've got to go to a way to get an actual pamphlet, you've got to go to the ABC. Fortunately, the other night, Tina had them sitting here, so I've grabbed myself an actual pamphlet. Is it going to be a training or a training? Well, I want to train myself in doing that lesson pamphlet more faithfully. It will mean making some space to do it. I might not end up with a lesson pamphlet, all the comments that lady ended up, but I will do so by training more faithfully than I did otherwise. It's going to be different for all of us. There's going to be different spaces to be your training plan. And keeping in mind we're going to be training forever, because even in heaven we're going to be learning more about how God works in and through us. So may you enjoy the connecting with God. May you enjoy being a vine that connects to the branch. May you enjoy abiding, because then he says through you he'll produce much fruit. May you delight in being a disciple of Christ. Enough for the afternoon. I'll give you an early mark before it starts raining again. Let's pray. Dear Lord, as we come to you now, we just want to be mindful of your presence and your leading. And as we think about what it is to be your disciple, may we allow you to dwell richly in us. May we allow you to work in and through us. May we train in having you increase your capacity for us to be your hands and your feet. May we bring glory and honour to you. May we be living sacrifices. Amen.